The topic for discussion today is essentially the types of cases that exist. Now, it's a little messy because the CRPC does not simply have two categories of cases. There are multiple categories of cases, and these exist at multiple points of time in a trial. So, let me just break down the different stages that exist. The first thing that exists in criminal law is initiating a case. That is, say, for example, filing an FIR. The next stage is whether the person is arrested or not. That is bailable or non-bailable. After that, the question is how does the trial proceed? What is the procedure of a trial? Whether it is a warrant triable case or a summons triable case or a sessions triable case, depending on which court it's going before. And finally, last but not least, is how does a case end? Either it ends in an acquittal or a conviction, or as we'll discuss in about 2 minutes, something called compounding, which is also within the scope of what I'll be covering today. So without further ado, let's start with how is a case initiated? Now, the initiating of a case is connected with the word cognizable. Does anyone know what a cognizable case is?
Yeah, cognizable means arresting someone without a warrant.
Okay, absolutely. So if you go to section 2, part C of the Criminal Procedure Code, which I advise you guys to keep handy, it states the definition of a cognizable offense means an offense for which, and a cognizable case means a case in which a police officer may, in accordance with the so and so law being in force, arrest without a warrant. So essentially, you can arrest someone without a warrant in a cognizable case. But I told you that a cognizable case is about initiation. It's not about the time you spend in jail. That's bailable, non-bailable. So why did I say that? Now, just for clarity, a non-cognizable offense is anything that's not a cognizable offense. It's defined as such. So that's not something you need to worry about. So the question is, why is whether an offense is cognizable or not connected to initiating a case? For that, you need to go to section 154 of the CRPC. Section 154 says every information relating to the commission of a cognizable offense, if given orally or if given in writing to a police officer in charge of a police station, shall be recorded by him. What this essentially refers to is an FIR. Does everyone here, I am sure, in some context or the other, has heard FIR? Whether you are unfortunate enough to be named in one, whether some family member of yours is unfortunate enough to be named in one, or whether you've seen it in a movie. So when I use the word cognizable, if you see how section 154 starts, it says every information relating to the commission of a cognizable offense if given orally to an officer in charge of a police station. So what this implicitly means is you can only register offenses at a police station if they are cognizable in nature. Now, what do you mean? Who decides whether it's cognizable or non-cognizable? That is written in the statute itself. The Indian Penal Code specifically states it. The CRPC also has a table which states it. So whether an offense is cognizable or not is defined by the legislators, that is Parliament, in the Indian Penal Code. But my point here is that only for cognizable offenses can you go to the police and register an FIR. Now, the question that arises is then what do you do for non-cognizable offenses? Now, an example of a does anyone know what an example of a non-cognizable offense? Maybe you've come across it in the media, maybe you've come across it while studying, maybe you've read for this class, and I'd be super impressed if you have. So, any guesses for a non-cognizable offense?
So theft.
Theft is not a non-cognizable offense, actually. Theft is a cognizable offense. But good effort. An example of a non-cognizable offense would be defamation. Defamation is a non-cognizable offense, irrespective of who I have defamed. Nobody can go and file an FIR for defamation. So, what is the procedure for non-cognizable offenses? In non-cognizable offenses, you have to file something called a complaint before a magistrate. If you go to section 190 of the CRPC, section 190 of the CRPC says, subject to the provisions of so and so, any magistrate may take cognizance of any offense upon information received from any person other than a police officer or upon his knowledge that such an offense has been committed. For example, and I'm going to use Yashank for all my examples. If I have called Yashank an ugly horse, he's not, it's just an example. And Yashank feels defamed by my comment because he thinks either he's a very attractive horse or he's not a horse at all. He can't go to the police and register an FIR. Yashank has to go to the magistrate and tell the magistrate to take cognizance of the defamation offense that I have committed. Whereas if I had murdered Yashank, okay, that's a bad example because Yashank can't really file much of an offense if he's murdered. But if I had, let's say, grievously hurt Yashank using a knife, Yashank and I had a fight at a bar and I stabbed Yashank and Yashank survived, he can go to the police station and register an FIR for a cognizable offense. So this is why cognizable and non-cognizable is connected to arrest, and I'll get to how. But the first thing that becomes relevant about cognizable and non-cognizable offenses is how the offenses are registered. Now, there is a very intelligent question here that some of you all should be having, which is, what if Yashank and I were at a bar and we were getting into a fight, and then I abused Yashank, I called him an ugly horse, and then I stabbed him. Now, I have both grievously hurt Yashank with a dangerous weapon, and I've also defamed Yashank. Then does Yashank have to go to the police station and register an FIR for, grievous hurt with dangerous weapon, and afterwards go to the magistrate and say, also Aditya Mehta has defamed me, please charge him, take cognizance of the offense of defamation against him? No. The law is very clear that if a cognizable and non-cognizable offense are both committed at the same time, then the police can take down the non-cognizable offense as well. That is why in this case, for instance, even though the defamation that I have committed against Yashank is non-cognizable, because as part of the same transaction, I have also stabbed him with a grievous weapon, the police will note down both offenses. So moving on to the next aspect, which is, but Aditya, this sounds stupid. The CRPC doesn't define it in terms of FIR and going to a magistrate. The CRPC defines it in terms of arrest without warrant is in the case of a cognizable offense. And if it's a non-cognizable offense, then as a corollary, you need a warrant. So the question is this: how does arrest come into the picture? In the case of arrest, in the case of a cognizable offense being registered, like if I had registered, Yashank had registered an FIR against me for stabbing him in a bar, the police at that point can arrest me without going to the magistrate for a warrant. They can see the offense, they can see that it's a serious offense, and they can immediately go and pick me up and take me into custody because it's punishable with a long period of time. Whereas in the case of a non-cognizable offense, first of all, if I go to the police, they will not register an FIR. They will say, please, we can't register an FIR under section 154 for non-cognizable offenses. Then, so I will have to go to the magistrate. Once I go to the magistrate will see, okay, what is he registering an offense for? Let's say it is defamation. He will take down the offense of defamation and he will say, okay, Yashank, I agree with you. Aditya has defamed you. Let's summon Aditya to the court and see what Aditya has to say in his defense. So he'll issue a summons to me. Now, let's say I ignore these summons because I'm an arrogant character. I'm not really concerned with any court, and I definitely don't want to do anything at the behest of Yashank, whom I think is an ugly horse. So I don't go to the court when the summons have been issued to me. Then the court can issue a warrant for my arrest. And once this warrant has been issued, it will go to the police station and then the police can arrest me. So you understand, in the case of a cognizable offense, because it's a slightly more serious offense, the police don't have to wait for the magistrate to remove a warrant saying Aditya is not coming to my court, Aditya is not cooperating with this trial, please go and arrest him. The police on their own accord can think, okay, we can investigate this offense, let's go and arrest Aditya. And they go and they arrest Aditya without a warrant of a magistrate. So that is why the definition in the CRPC is connected with arrest and with respect to the need for a warrant of arrest. Is there any question at this point? Any confusion? It's a little complicated and it will get more and more complicated as we cover more and more aspects. So don't hesitate in continuously interrupting me. I would love to clarify any doubts. Having covered this much, let's move on to this paradigm that Yashank and I have had a fight at a bar. We were discussing, I don't know, we were discussing whether Virat Kohli is a good batsman or not. And I am an ardent Virat Kohli fan, and Yashank has become a little skeptical considering his recent form. So I stab Yashank while calling him an ugly horse, of course. And Yashank has somehow survived, blocked the blood from bleeding out. He's made it through. He's gotten some medical attention and he's gone to the police station to get an FIR registered. Now, when an FIR is registered against me, The police need to investigate the offense. That's one. The second thing is the police need to make sure I don't run away. Because if I know, I mean, what our friend Vijay Malia, some argue, has done is that he was aware that an offense was going to be registered in India against him. And he knew that if he was in India, he would get arrested, and God knows when, if ever, he would get bail. So he decided instead, chalo, I will fly to England and I won't get there. You know, you have to extradite me before you can arrest me. What if Aditya Mehta is a similar kind of character? You know, Aditya Mehta may decide there may be an offense registered against me. I have stabbed Yashank. Yashank is not the sort who will just go home, clean up his wounds, and go to sleep. Yashank will go to the police for sure. I'm going to leave the country. So the police then have to arrest me for two reasons. One is they want to make sure I don't flee. The other is that they also need to investigate. Was I the one who stabbed Yashank? Is Yashank just lying when he gave the police that information? Third thing is, of course, I may dispose of the weapon, tamper with the witnesses. So there are a bunch of reasons why the police need to arrest. So then we have reached a point where Aditya Mehta has gone to his house and he's sitting there and he's watching television. And suddenly a police officer enters his house and says, arrest him. Now the question then becomes, how does Aditya Mehta get bail? The meaning of bail, I'm sure all of y'all colloquially know, and effectively is this: it's the right to be released pending your trial at this stage. So because I am innocent until proven guilty, no court has come to a conclusion that I am guilty yet. There is no evidence. It is only one police officer who has decided to arrest Aditya. I think I have a right to bail. Now there are two kinds of offenses even with respect to bail: bailable and non-bailable. Does anyone know the difference at the outset? Because this is covered in popular culture, etc. And I, before I did my law degree, for a long time thought non-bailable means you can never get bail. But I have come to learn that that's not the case.
Bail is a matter of right, and non-bailable offense under that, bail is not a matter of right. It's upon the judge. It's on judge's discretion.
Okay, I think Tanvi is absolutely right. Ayush, do you have anything more to add?
Yes, bailable offense mostly are in the cases of non-serious offenses, whereas NBW are for the serious offenses like murder, etc. Thank you.
Okay, that's absolutely correct. So, and just to sort of reiterate what I think Tanvi has actually covered pretty well, is a bailable offense is where if I am arrested, the police, and I tell the police officer on the spot, look, I want bail, the police officer has to give me bail. So the section you should be looking at this point is section 436 of the CRPC. CRPC, of course, is the Criminal Procedure Code. I'm sure you all know. If you all read section, in what cases provision as to bail and bonds, the section goes when any person other than a person accused of a non-bailable offense is arrested. So it's only in bailable offenses. Again, bailable is defined in the Indian Penal Code. Like, for example, the Indian Penal Code will say that murder is a non-bailable offense, or, you know, hurt is a bailable offense, right? So let's read. Or offenses under the Information Technology Act are bailable offenses. So it says, when any person other than a person accused of a non-bailable offense is arrested or detained without a warrant, or appears before a court and is prepared at any time while in custody. So a police officer in a bailable offense cannot pick me up and say, "No, I'm not giving you bail right now. I'll give it to you after 4 hours. You come with me to the police station, you time pass over there. I will hold you there. I'm pissed. I'm in a bad mood. I had a fight with my wife. I'm going to take it out on you." He cannot do that in law because it states over here, and is prepared at any time while in the custody of such officer or of such proceeding before such court to give bail, such person shall be released on bail. The important word here is shall. Shall means necessarily. The police officer does not have a choice. Contrast this with, as Ayush put it, non-bailable offenses. Section 437, Section 439. These state that a court, if you read the section, let's just go through 437 quickly. When any person accused or suspected of the commission of any non-bailable offense is arrested or detained without warrant by an officer in charge of a police station or appears before a court other than the High Court or Court of Session, he may be released on bail. Shall and may. So in bailable offenses, you shall be released on bail. In 437, which are non-bailable offenses, you may be released on bail. And who decides? As was correctly said by Tanvi, the court decides. Now, that is the only difference between bailable and non-bailable offenses. It's as simple as that. You don't have to go deeper into it. You don't have to complicate it. Once an offense is registered, if you are arrested in a bailable offense, you will be released on bail immediately. If you are arrested in a non-bailable offense by a police officer, he will produce you before a court. You will have to make a bail application, and the court will consider the FIR, consider everything, and only then decide whether the court thinks you deserve bail or not. Now, the reason there is a distinction between bailable and non-bailable offenses is very simple. Right now, if I have defamed Yashank by calling him an ugly horse, it's a bad thing I've done. There's no doubt about it. But it's not a very, very bad thing. It's not a very, very serious offense. I shouldn't be kept in jail for 1 day or 2 days or for my entire trial when I'm willing to cooperate with the trial and come to court. That is why an offense like defamation is bailable in nature, or would have been. Or an offense like hurt. Hurt is bailable. You're understanding? Ayush was absolutely right when he says that serious offenses are made non-bailable, like murder, like rape, like dacoity, like robbery with weapons. But non-serious offenses are made bailable in nature, like defamation or like hacking. Under the Information Technology Act, hacking is an offense, but it's bailable. If I was caught dishonestly hacking Yashank's computer because I wanted to delete the email in which I called him an ugly horse, again, Yashank, this is just for the purposes of an example, and because I used you last time and apparently your colleagues found it entertaining, so I just couldn't resist. But if I want to, let's say I send Yashank an email stating that Yashank, you are an ugly horse, and Yashank knows that I've sent him this kind of email, and I'm afraid that when Yashank reads it, he's going to file a defamation case against me. So I quickly try to hack into Yashank's computer to delete the email. Now, hacking under the Information Technology Act is a crime. It is an offense, especially when done with dishonest intention. But it's a bailable offense. So even if Yashank gets the FIR registered, I will not be arrested. If I'm arrested, I will be released on bail immediately. Now, we've covered initiating a case. We've covered the bail aspect of things. Now, the next question becomes, what is the procedure by which a case will proceed, right? How does it work once an FIR has been filed? Now, this class is not about the long procedure on how a trial goes through, what is discharge, what is this, what is that. So I won't get into too much detail on that aspect. But what you do need to know is that there are two kinds of cases. And based on what kind of case it is, the magistrate will follow a certain procedure. Does anyone have any idea what I'm talking about? In the CRPC again, the CRPC is like the holy grail of criminal law. In some ways, criminal law is easier because the CRPC has almost everything that you largely need to know. Whereas civil law is a lot broader because it has a lot of procedures outside of the Civil Procedure Code as well. Any question? Any idea what cases I'm talking about? Okay, let's go to section 2, part X of the Criminal Procedure Code. It says warrant case. Warrant case means a case relating to an offense punishable with death, imprisonment for life, or imprisonment for a term exceeding 2 years. And summons case, which is 2W, which says summons case means a case relating to an offense not being a warrant case. So there are two broad kinds of cases that exist. The warrant cases, which are, Ayush may have put it, serious cases where you can either be punished with death or with life or with more than 2 years, or summons cases, which are slightly more petty cases, like a case under hurt, for example. There you're punishable with a few months. So there's no point in making it a serious case like a warrant case, and you make it a summons case. Now, the difference between a summons trial case and a warrant case is broadly the procedure that is followed by the trial court. I won't get into too much detail because I can have a 2-hour class on each of the summons case as well as a warrant case. But section 260 onwards deals with the procedure for a summons case. And it's a very casual procedure. It basically states that, okay, a summons case is going on. I will issue a summons to the accused. The accused will come. I will broadly explain to him what he is accused of. I will take the evidence from the prosecution and the defense, and then I will decide whether to convict him or not. This is, for example, in the case of The Negotiable Instruments Act, check bouncing cases are summons cases. Defamation cases, Yashank the poor ugly horse will have to file a summons case against me. Contrast this with warrant cases, where if you go to section 204, and you don't need to go, I'll summarize it. If you go to section 204, a warrant case is a case like cheating. The moment the court finds out that, okay, there is a case like there is the offense of cheating committed, the court need not issue summons to me. If the court wants, it can directly issue a warrant saying this is a serious charge. Please arrest Aditya and bring him to this courtroom. That is the primary starting point of the difference. After that, and warrant cases are dealt with in section 239 to 245 of the CRPC, the court will frame charges. It's not, they cannot simply explain to me what the offense is. There will be a formal charge which is framed against me. After a formal charge is framed, the prosecution will lead evidence, then the defense will lead evidence, and then there will be either a conviction or an acquittal. So it's a much more formal, complex procedure in the case of a warrant case, for the simple reason that the offense is more serious, the stakes are higher, and the sentence is likely longer. You can't follow a casual approach when it might lead to someone spending the rest of their life in jail. But where the offense is only punishable with 2 years, is of a milder sort, such as defamation or hurt, you don't want to make the procedure so complicated that the case will drag on forever. This is funny because cases anyway do drag on forever in India, even summons cases. But back, in 1973, when the CRPC was being drafted, people were a little more hopeful. Now, is there any doubt at this point between summons cases and warrant cases? These are fairly straightforward concepts. You just have to remember the different levels at which they operate. Cognizable cases are at the time of registering an offense. You go to a magistrate, you go to the police station. And then about how the police officer can arrest. Does he need a warrant or not? Then after that, we move on to whether it's bailable or non-bailable. If it's bailable, the police officer has to give you bail immediately. If it's non-bailable, then you have to go before a court and the court gets to decide whether to give you bail or not. After that, the trial starts. And it will be either a summons triable case where they can just summon you and briefly explain to you what the allegation against you is, quickly take evidence and finish the case, or is it a warrant case where they can issue a warrant to bring you to court, where formal charges will be framed. You will be heard on whether the charge is clear, whether it's correct. You can challenge that order. You can file for discharge. Then there will be evidence from both parties, and then finally an acquittal or conviction. So the last thing that we get to, before I have some theories that I want to throw, some questions that I want to throw at you all, is what is this strange word called compounding? Now, basically, what happens sometimes is, let's say me and Yashank, and I'm just going to use Yashank again. I want to cheat Yashank. I want to tell Yashank, this Yashank is a little gullible sort. I feel like I can get away with him, and he trusts me a lot. Me and him have been friends for years now. So I go to Yashank and I tell Yashank, you know what? You give me 10 lakhs. I'm going to buy this car for you and give you this car. And if you have to go to the market and buy this car, it'll cost you 12 lakhs. And Yashank trusts me. And I continuously induce him to trust me, promising him that I'll buy this car for cheap. So Yashank gives me these 10 lakhs. And of course, I have no intention of buying the car. I take those 10 lakhs. I go to Vegas. I have a great time. I blow up 10 lakhs. I keep hoping that I gamble and win more money and can pay back Yashank. But like most people who go to Vegas, I lose money. Hopefully just in the casinos and not on the other options that Vegas does have to offer. But eventually I come back to India and I have none of Yashank's money. And Yashank asks me one day, where's the car? You promised you'd give it to me by today. And I have no answer. Now, this is a classic case of cheating. Because I have cheated Yashank. I've dishonestly induced him to give me money, promising him a certain car, which I had no intention of buying him. Yashank files an FIR against me. I get arrested. I get bail. Now, at the end of the day, what the hell does Yashank care about? Yashank doesn't care about Aditya Mehta going to jail for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Yashank doesn't care about the fact that Aditya Mehta will have a trial which will go on for 10 years. Yashank is like, yaar, mere 10 lakh ud gaye. And this Aditya has run away with it. Now I can't buy the car that I wanted. At this point enters compounding. Compounding in colloquial terms is basically settling a case. It is where I go, the complainant goes, and we tell him, yaar, let's settle this. Yashank, I'll tell you what, I took 10 lakhs from you. I took it 1 year ago. I'll give you back 10 lakhs with 10% interest. I'll give you 11 lakhs. Let's settle this case. And Yashank goes, you know what? What am I going to get if Aditya spends money on lawyers, if he spends time in jail? I'm only concerned about my money. And so Yashank agrees to settle the case. That case is considered compounded. I am in law considered acquitted. That case is removed from the books. I don't have a criminal record, and the burden on courts reduces. The reason compounding is important is because sometimes it's not worth it for the case to go on. Sometimes disputes are private, like in this case. Now I'll explain that a little more, but just quickly going to the section 320. Lists out kinds of offenses which can be compounded. Make note, and I'll get into detail on this, not all offenses can be compounded. But basically, if you go to section 320, there are two tables. The first table consists of offenses which can be compounded as soon as Yashank and I come to an agreement, like voluntarily causing hurt. So let's say I went and I flicked Yashank's ears 5 times. That's hurt. That can be compounded the moment Yashank says, "Yaar, bhul ja, yaar, itne saal se dost hai, let's compound it." Or let's say wrongfully confining a person for 10 days or more. Let's say I locked up Yashank in a room. Yashank kept saying, let me go, and I didn't let him go. That would be wrongful confinement, but Yashank and me can settle the case. Now, there is a second kind of compounding, a second table that exists under 322, which requires the permission of the court as well. So, for example, let's take my previous example of cheating, because cheating, that is 420, comes within the second table. Let's say I cheated Yashank for 10 lakhs. Yashank and I agree, chalo, theek hai, Yashank, I'll give you 11 lakhs, let's settle this case. Yashank is happy. Yashank and me agree to settle the case. But we can't just file an application to the court saying, Yashank and I have settled, please withdraw this case. Because cheating is a slightly more serious offense than hurt, we have to ask the court, are you okay with this case getting settled? And if the court is like, theek hai yaar, yeah, it makes sense, let this case be settled. Yashank is getting his money back. Why should I waste my time? Then the court can allow it to be settled. Now, why do you have to ask the court? Because criminal law is about public wrongs. It's about crimes against society. That is why there is a police. That is why there is a public prosecutor. So if everyone is allowed to commit any offense and just settle it, no, it will be a problem. Let's take an example of Mukesh Ambani. Mukesh Ambani is very, very rich. Let's say Mukesh Ambani one day decides, you know what? Let me meet Aditya. Let me kill off Aditya. Because I know that Aditya's sister is suffering from cancer. I mean, these are all hypotheticals, guys. But yes, no offense to Mr. Ambani, it's a hypothetical. But let's say Mukesh Ambani says, I will kill Aditya. And because I will go to his family and tell them, you know what, guys, I will sponsor your sister's treatment. I will give you an extra 10 crores. So let us settle this case. Then, unfortunately, the death of Aditya is not avenged by society. Such a serious thing of Aditya dying may be agreed to be settled by the sister of Aditya, who is very desperate for treatment. Society cannot allow for such a risk that the rich and powerful are capable of settling all of the cases against them. Which is why, if you see section 320, it does not include the offense of rape. It does not include the offense of murder. You cannot settle a rape. You cannot settle a murder. Because the parliament thought, you know what? These are serious offenses. They're offenses against society. We are not going to let these cases be settled. These cases have to go to trial. If the person is guilty, he has to go to jail. Something unique happened subsequently. And I'll give you an example. What has happened is, some offenses are not in section 320, but people still wanted to settle them. I'll give you an example. There is an offense under section 467, which is forgery of a valuable security. What that means is, let's say I forged property deeds. Okay. Let's say Shashank has a house. Shashank has a nice house at Marine Drive facing the ocean, beautiful view, beautiful sunrise, beautiful sunset. And I know it's worth maybe 15, 16 crores. So I'm a little smart guy. I'm a lawyer. I sit on my laptop. I draft out a sale deed in which, instead of saying Shashank owns this property, I say Aditya Mehta owns this property. And I sell it to my friend Jay. And I tell Jay, look, as per this deed, I am the owner. Why don't you buy this property? Look, it's clearly mentioned that I got this property by means of inheritance. Jay agrees. Jay pays me 16 crores. I take the money. That entire document is forged. And Jay shows up at Yashank's house and says, "Boss, ghar de de." And Yashank is shocked because Yashank was sitting in the morning having his cup of coffee, enjoying the sunrise, not expecting some random fellow called Jay to show up and claim his house. Right? Now, in this case, I have committed cheating, which we know can be settled under the compounding provision. But I have also committed section 467, which is forgery of a valuable security, because I created a fake sale deed. I created fake property documents. Right? Now, section 467 cannot be settled as per the section 320 of the CRPC, that is the compounding provisions. But let's say Aditya Mehta has a change of heart. He says, "I'll tell you what, yeah, Jay, I'll return your 16 crores with 50 lakhs of interest." Then again, Jay will be happy because Jay doesn't care if Aditya Mehta goes to jail for the rest of his life under section 467 or 7 years under 420. Jay actually just wants his money back. But now, unfortunately, the law of compounding says you can't compound section 467. It's a non-compoundable offense. So what does Jay do? So an exception has been created by judicial interpretation, which says that cases that can't be compounded under 400 and 320, you can approach the High Court directly. And then the High Court has the discretion to decide whether to allow you to compound it or not. So, for example, Jay, Yashank, and I will all go to the High Court. We will file a petition in the High Court saying, "Look, there is an offense under me, an FIR against me under section 420 and 467. These can't be compounded under the CRPC. But you, as the Honorable High Court, please use your discretion and let me compound it. I'm willing to pay Yashank. I'm willing to pay Jay. I'm feeling very bad about the offenses I've committed." And then the High Court can say, "You know what? Aditya means well. Okay, he may have made a mistake. Okay, he may have done something wrong also, but he's repaying the money that he took from Jay with interest. He's giving Yashank also new money and a fresh cup of coffee, so Yashank is happy. Let us quash this case." And this power is under 482 of the CRPC, which is the inherent powers of the High Court. It says that the High Court can basically do whatever it wants where there are no specific provisions. Now, the reason this is critical to understand is that the High Court won't use its discretion always. I'm sure you all have read in the papers about rape cases where a man allegedly rapes a woman, and after the offense is registered, man is arrested. Suddenly, the man and woman are married. And then they file a quashing petition in the High Court saying, "Please quash this offense. I've got married to the person I have allegedly committed this offense against, and let us continue our married life happily." The High Court will sometimes and very often correctly says no, because we don't want to create a situation where already one woman has been raped allegedly, and after that she is sometimes by society pressured into marrying her rapist. And rape is such an inherently wrong activity. No matter what you do after that, we are not willing to forgive you. You face a trial, and if you've committed the crime, you go to jail. You understand the distinction? In the Shashank and Jay example, it's a question of maybe 15, 16 crores, a lot of money, but I'm willing to repay it. But something like rape, something like murder, you can't bring back a person who's dead back to life. You can't take away the horror that a woman has faced under when she has been raped by paying or by marrying. And that is why these offenses are not compoundable, and even High Courts generally will not quash such cases. How to differentiate between a warrant case and a summon case? The question, a warrant case is defined in CRPC as a case that is punishable with 2 years or more, or with life or with death. Or summons, that's a warrant case. A summons case is anything that is not a warrant case. So anything that's punishable with 1 year or 6 months or up to 2 years is a summons case.
In this warrant case, those NBW cases, before arrest, it's a mandatory to give the notice under 41A.
Actually, it's not 100% mandatory, because you can't make it 100% mandatory that 41A notices will be given, because this might be abused by accused individuals. But two things that make that you are correct in saying is that the courts say that where it's possible to give a 41A notice, the police should give a 41A notice. So, for example, let's say Vijay Mallya is at the airport and I register an offense under 420 against him. I'm not going to have the time to give him a 41A notice because he'll catch the flight and run away, right? So in those cases, arrest is justified. But have you all heard of that comedian? There was a comedian, a very Munawar. He was arrested. He had a comedy show that he hosted in UP, and he made some comments in UP during that comedy show. And there were some people in the crowd who didn't like his comments, so they went and got an FIR registered, and the police promptly came back with them and arrested him also. And his bail application went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court released him on interim bail, stating that, see, he's not somebody who's going to leave the country. He's not somebody who was a flight risk, who was going to go underground. He was conducting his comedy show. First, you give him a 41A notice, find out what he has to say, and after that, decide whether to arrest him or not. So courts expect you to give a 41A notice if you have time. If there is some urgent requirement, let's say if Munawar was going to run away from the country or he was going to destroy evidence of that show, then you might be exempt. But you will have to show why the urgency was there. And this is not for all non-bailable cases. This is only for those non-bailable cases punishable with up to 7 years. So, for example, murder is punishable with death or life. There you don't have to give a 41A notice. There you can arrest directly. For anyone who wants to read further on this, the landmark judgment on 41A notices is a judgment called Arnesh Kumar. Quite popular. I'm gonna deal with a hypothetical at this point, and this is usually my favorite part of these classes, and I want one of you all to tell me how things will proceed. Okay, so I hope you all have a CRPC handy, because that will help things. Now let's assume Yashank is a female for the purposes of this example. Yashank is my wife, and Yashank is pregnant, and let's say I don't want him to have the child, so I cause his pregnancy to end without his consent. I do this by either hitting his stomach, or I just feed him something, or I do something of the sort. This is an offense under section 313 of the Indian Penal Code. What is the first thing that happens? How does Yashank get redressal? What does he have to do? Does he have to go to a court, or does he have to go to the police? I'm not telling you if it's cognizable or non-cognizable. You can check that yourself in the CRPC. Section 313 is a cognizable offense. So you won't have to go to a magistrate to get the offense registered. You can straight away go to the police station, and then the police will register the offense. Now, once the police have registered the offense, the police come to me and they arrest me. How do I get bail? Hint, it's a non-bailable offense. Now, how do I get bail?
Sir, we have to proceed to the court of session because the offense is for more than 7 years. Here in case is life imprisonment.
Yes, you're right. In that we have to get bail from a court. We can't get bail from the magistrate himself, because from the police officer himself. Now, let's do another example. I've committed an offense of forgery for the purpose of cheating, which is similar to what the Prashant example was. How will the offense be registered? It's section 468, by the way. Okay, forgery for the purpose of cheating is a cognizable offense. So once again, I will go to the police station and register an FIR. Now, once the FIR is registered and I am arrested, how will I get bail? It's a non-bailable offense. So I will have to get bail from the magistrate. Again, the police officer cannot give me bail. Now, once the trial starts, will it be a summons triable case or a warrant triable case? Hint, the offense is punishable with 7 years.
Warrant, sir, warrant.
Yes, it's a warrant triable case. Anything over 2 years is a warrant triable case. And last thing is, if I want to settle this case, how will I settle it? If you have a CRPC in front of you, this should be straightforward. But
yes, sir. Under section 482, the discretion power of the High Court.
Why can't I go under 320?
Sir, I'm not sure. I just knew of the discretionary power.
See, section 320 has a list of offenses written over there. If section 468 was in that list, then I could settle it before the trial court itself. But since it's not mentioned in that list, I have to use the discretionary power of the High Court. It's the difference. So if you remember my example, if I had just cheated Yashank, then I can go to the magistrate only and settle it, because section 320 says you can settle it before the trial court itself if it's an offense under 420. But if it is an offense of 468, which is not in that list under 320, then I have to use the discretionary power of the High Court. Is that clear? But to clarify once more, just for the benefit of everyone, section 320 has a list of offenses. If an offense is in that list, then you can settle it before the magistrate itself. If the offense is outside that list, then you have to use the discretionary power of the High Court. So in this case, 468 is not in that list, and therefore we have to go to the High Court. Okay, can police search your home without a warrant in a non-cognizable case? This is a very, very, very good question, actually. It's something I didn't cover because it's not directly within the scope of my mandate. But if you go to section 155 of the CRPC, it says, section 155(2) says no police officer shall investigate a non-cognizable case without the order of a magistrate. So no, the police cannot search your home without a warrant in a non-cognizable case. In what kind of offenses the accused gets anticipatory bail? Well, it's not within the scope of this, but I can definitely help you out. In any non-bailable case, you can try and get anticipatory bail. Generally speaking, of course, in offenses like murder and rape and serious offenses, it's difficult, but it's possible. Okay, third question. What if one party does not adhere to the compromise agreed upon in a compoundable case? So the moment that happens, you can call for recalling of the compounding order, because a court is not going to allow the compounding unless it has already been settled completely. Right? Any doubts? So for example, if I had to pay Ayush, the court will say first you pay him, then only I will compound it. And if let's say the court settles the case before that and I don't pay him, you file for recall of that order. Now, the next question is, I think this is there's no such thing as a silly question. Please ask all questions and we'll all have a good laugh if it's silly, but you must ask it. It's better than having a doubt. Can we convert a summons case into a warrant case, and in what circumstances? No. So if a case is a summons case because of the offenses involved, it will always be a summons case. And the only way to make it a warrant case is if there were other offenses involved which were punishable with 2 years or more. So the answer is no. And it wasn't a silly question. It's a fair question. I think that's all the questions. In case there are any more, you can, send them across right away. And had a good time taking this class. I hope you guys understood what I was trying to say. And I hope it was fun as well. I tried to use Yashank to make it a little entertaining. And thank you all for the time. And I hope this was clear to you. And I promise you I'm better looking than the picture they put of me